Now, I happen to be an abolitionist. I happen to believe that we need to abolish prisons as the main institution addressing a whole range of social problems that ought to be addressed by other institutions. If drugs are decriminalized, it should be possible to drastically reduce the number of people in prison. So I would say that decriminalization of drugs is the first step in a strategy of decarceration.
I'm 62 years old. I am an ex-convict. I served altogether about 15 years in and out of the federal system and state system. 1960 was my first time that I went to federal prison. There were always drugs in the institution, which brought along a certain amount of violence. Sick as it is, there's a certain amount of status to you. You do a certain amount of time for a certain crime, it becomes part of your identity. It's not something, in my case, that I was willing to give up very easy. When I got clean, I thought perhaps I might get clean, but I would never give up the streets and this image that I was, and I'd worked so hard to get there. My youngest son, I was pregnant with the first time I went to prison. Started using when I started getting clean. You know, essentially I abandoned the kids for my own lifestyle. And living with that has not been easy. He ended up going to one of the same prisons I had done time in. And I chose to go and visit him, and it wasn't easy. It's very painful. This lifestyle that I've been in, I'm 62, and I've only been clean nearly 23 of those years, and all of the other years were pretty screwed up. Crime pays a lot of people, so it's not to anybody's advantage to change really quick.
Private corporate structure that has most consistently benefited from a vast increase in the number of prisons, the number of people in prison. And that corporations that serve our daily needs are deeply implicated in the expansion of the punishment industry. The more radical position, I think, would be to bring prisoners into the unions, to give prisoners membership in unions, United Electrical Workers Union, AFSCME, so that they are able to have the same benefits as workers on the outside. People often do not think deeply enough about the profound impact of imprisonment on a person's psyche, about the emotional impact of imprisonment. Many people assume that someone should be able to spend 2, 5, 10 years, 20 years in prison and then get out and be fine and be able to, sort of live a normal life. Prison is designed to break a person's spirit. Prison is designed to deprive a person, and especially women, of any degree of autonomy. Prison is designed to make a person unfit to live in a free world. There ought to be a place where recently released prisoners can go to find a job and to be guaranteed of a job. There ought to be a place that provides housing. There ought to be a place that provides emotional support, some kind of therapy that almost everyone who's been in prison will need, regardless of whether they admit to it or not.
The institution set up a lot of the segregation themselves so that the women don't gain too much power as a community. The scariest thing about being in prison is that you've put your life in somebody else's hands. You've lost all personal choices. Somebody's dictating the rules to you and how your life will play out while you're in there. Above all, when you're inside, you can show no fear. The worst abuse that goes on in prison is the mental abuse. My greatest fear in life is that I won't achieve my goals artistically and creatively and economically, and most of that has to do with the fact that I did spend 10 years with a needle in my arm, which was a greater prison than the physical prison that I then spent another 15 months in. You learn not to show any emotions and not to show any fear. So it's very hard to then be vulnerable in front of others, to trust them and to open up and be who you really are. What I've gotten is freedom to not be afraid to look over my shoulder, freedom that nobody's going to lock me up, and freedom to make the choices I want to in my life, if they work out or not.
Women have been ignored. The issue of women has been considered insignificant. We have to sort of stand back and look at the larger picture and ask, why it is that although women constitute a smaller proportion of prisoners, they are targets of a much greater magnitude of punishment.